All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. This is Jason Gillam with Secure Ideas, and thanks for for joining us in our first webcast of the year, web penetration testing with Burp and CO2. Hopefully, can I get some kind of a feedback in the chat there to see if you guys can hear me? We have good, thanks. We have almost 100 people on the line right now, so I've gone ahead and muted everybody because otherwise it'll get a little bit crazy. Well, let's just go ahead and get started and take it from there. So first, a little bit about me. I am a senior security consultant with Secure Ideas. I have a lot of industry experience that's kind of a mixed technical background. So I've done a lot of software development, some system architecture, quite a bit of web application security, and quite a bit of pen testing, especially in recent years. My favorite parts of the job, I love to hack things. I love to hack things from both sides of the word. So as innovative problem solving as well as breaking things, as long as you have permission. And then another thing that I've really enjoy is contributing to the open source community. So Burp CO2 is one of my contributions. I'm also a contributor to numerous other projects. Hobbies, I'm a runner, I'm a bit of a musician, and probably most importantly and most relevant to this webcast is the fact that I'm a home brewer, and I'll get to that after. So without further ado, let's start into an overview. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over web penetration testing, just kind of in a general sense. We'll talk a little bit about interception proxies. I'm going to go over Burp features for those who are on the listening to this webcast who don't have a lot of experience with Burp, and then we'll jump into CO2 and go through a demonstration. So. I'm saving all the demonstrations till the end. You'll see some screenshots in the meantime. I just didn't want to be flipping back and forth too many times, so I'm trying to have all of the live demo stuff at the very end. And in terms of audio, I just want to make a point before I jump into the content. I have gone ahead and muted everybody because we have close to 100 attendees on the call right now. And it would be kind of crazy if we were all talking at the same time or hearing background noise. So I've gone ahead and muted everybody. If you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat window. And I'll also note before I jump into the content that this entire webcast is being recorded. So we will post it on YouTube within the next, well, hopefully today or tomorrow. And it'll be available there as well. So if any of your friends missed out on it, or if you miss any details, you'll be able to go back and revisit it later. Okay, so web penetration testing. Why do we need to do it? Well, the main reason is because web applications are everywhere. I mean, we are security professionals, and one of the main targets that show up in any sort of pen test of a network is web applications. You're going to see them all over the place. They're in every vertical. On the left-hand side of this particular slide, I have just a listing of various different places where you're going to find them. I mean, everything's in a web application, right? It's become the sort of the de facto technology for a lot of what we do to communicate with each other. Even static sites, what used to be static content, is often actually sitting on a web application now because the the content is all generated through some kind of a framework, such as WordPress or Joomla or something along those lines. So behind all of those web applications, behind those pages, there's code that's executing and doing things. So as we find vulnerabilities, we may be able to attack either that code running in behind, or the underlying system, or in some cases the users of the applications, or we may be able to obtain information out of the application that we shouldn't be able to obtain, or even execute functionality that we shouldn't be able to. So the types of things that we're going to find inside of web applications, probably one of the most well-known lists is the OWASP Top 10. And that's on the right-hand side here. It's just summarized there. The OWASP project, they update this list every few years with basically the most prominent and highest risk web-based vulnerabilities. I'm seeing a question. Can I move the slide to the right? I'm sorry, I can't move the slides. It's actually a full screen for me. Looking at this top 10 list, at the very top of the list, we have our injection attacks. This one we're trying to break out of the whatever context we're in and get into some kind of context where we can execute code. And then working down this list, we get into broken authentication, cross-site scripting, so on and so forth. Okay. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these. We really don't have time. One thing that I do want to mention is, actually, never mind. I'm going to go ahead. That's web applications in a nutshell. Now we are testing them. There are certain skills that we need to acquire and groom, I guess, to become a good web penetration tester. And this is a list that I've come up with. I've been working on this, kind of a little pet project of mine, to come up with a good set of essential skills and then kind of build out how to develop these. So I just kind of go through these. So the first skill set it's kind of two sides of the same coin, which is mapping and searching. So this is learning how to understand an application. So when you're looking at a web application, how do you understand the requests and the responses, what sort of headers are there, the overall structure of the application, maybe how it's architected. And then once you've mapped all of that out and you've actually captured some normal requests and responses, how do you search over that and what do you look for? So that's one skill that becomes pretty important. Another one is the reissue and diff is kind of how I've bundled it, and that's there's a set of skills around picking apart a single request and reissuing that several times with different changes to different pieces and seeing how that change in the input impacts the output. So what sort of response do we get back from the server when we change various parts of the request? And one example of where we see this a lot is username harvesting. Flaws, that's probably one of the most common areas. So we might try changing the user, and depending on how the response changes, so we just look at it in terms of diffing it between two different responses, we might be able to tell whether or not a user is actually in the system. The third essential skill I have is fuzzing. So this is learning how do you set up and run. Basically, you're repeating the same requests many times, and usually you have an automated process to do this. And then part of that request is going to change each time, and that's where the fuzzing occurs. And so that part, it can be any part of the request really, but some common areas might be a username or password field, or it could be the file path being passed in, or it could be an ID or any other part of the request, really. So that also becomes important, is understanding how you do this. And this is something that we will be taking a look at in more detail later on, because CO2 does a lot of work with Burp's fuzzing tool, Intruder. The next essential skill is automated scanning. In web pen testing, it's important to know how to do all of the manual testing, and also know when and how to perform the automated scanning in an efficient fashion as well. The last thing you want to do is generate tons of false positives or a bunch of false negatives and end up missing things, but automated scanning does have its place. And the last skill I have on my list here as an essential skill is knowing how to document your results. And documentation, it's probably the most important step and the hardest one to get right. So it's coming up with good steps for reproducing, making sure you're taking good notes and taking screenshots along the way, and providing a really good explanation of the risk for a particular vulnerability. Okay, so as I go through the rest of the webcast, try to maybe think about some of these things. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so let's move on to interception proxies. So an interception proxy, what it is it's basically a piece of code that is running, that you point your browser at the proxy, and basically what happens is any request that you send in your browser will pass through that proxy on its way to the target. Okay, and then the response will also pass through that proxy on its way back to the browser. So what that allows us to do at the very base level is we can listen in, or basically wiretap into the HTTP protocol. We can see the request, the raw request, and we can see the raw response. Now, the interception proxy, which is the web pen tester's tool of choice, takes that to a new level. It does a lot more than just look at the traffic. So we record all of the requests and responses, everything, and then we have something that we can search. Remember when I was talking about the essential skill being able to map and then search. So that plays a big part there. We can man in the middle our own traffic. So we can intercept, and then we can also modify requests and then resend those same requests in different ways. We can use the proxy as a fuzzing tool to send a list, let's say a list of usernames or a list of passwords, and modify just one part of that request each time. Most interception proxies used for web pen testing include some form of automated scanner, and then there's also numerous other miscellaneous capabilities that are in there to kind of help make our job easier. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Burp, which is an interception proxy. Before I do, I'll just explain briefly why we have chosen Burp, and that's that it is a commercial product. It kind of is the de facto standard in terms of a commercial product anyway for web pen testing. If you are looking for something to use and you don't want to shell out the money for a commercial product, then really the best alternative that I know of is Z-Attack Proxy, which is an OWASP product. So that's available on, if you can just Google it, Z-Attack Proxy or Zap, and you'll find it. The CO2 plugin is currently, there isn't a version that works with Zap though. Now Burp, there is a free version as well, but I do have just a word of caution on that. Is the free version is great for checking out the tool and kind of getting an idea how it works, but parts of it are disabled or limited. So there are a number of features that are non-functional in the free version, and some of those really are essential to doing a good web pen test. So I wouldn't use that for your pen testing, but it's great for playing around with. So Burp, the author, Portswigger, I don't know where the name came from, but it's a Java-based product. Zap is as well. It has a really good spidering capability. The one of its best features, I think, is the intruder tool, which is the fuzzing tool in there. It has so many different options, and it's fairly easy to configure. It's just really, really powerful. So it's that alone is worth paying for the license, in my opinion. And it also does a bunch of other things too, such as smart decoding and encoding. It does some capturing of tokens and analysis of randomness and that sort of thing. So, but at its base is a proxy, and then it can do all of this other stuff. So if you open up Burp Suite, this is the type of screen that you're going to see. It has all these tabs on there that do all these different things. And I'll actually walk through some of the main ones right now. If you're new to Burp, have never seen it before, then this will give you at least a little bit of an overview. But what you'll really want to do is probably look for Kevin Johnson and James Jardine from Secure Ideas are doing a Burp tactical session that's going to go through in a lot more detail, and it'll also cover a lot of the tips and tricks of how to use the tool. So, and that's coming up, I think, late February. So look for that one if you're interested. But just for the basics, the target tab is pretty straightforward. On the left-hand side, you have a list of all of the links that have been discovered, and it organizes them in a folder-like structure. It should note that there are some that are black and others that are gray. Anything that's gray hasn't been visited yet. It's just a link that's been discovered on a page somewhere. On the right-hand side, we have a breakdown of what's inside whatever folder selected on the left. And then at the bottom here, we have options to get into the request and response. One other thing I should mention here is this filter section here. It's not obvious, but this is actually a big button. So the way you can configure what you see in these windows is you press that button, and then it drops down a bunch of check boxes and things that you can configure. It's actually got quite a few features on there, so it's something that's kind of important and not so obvious, so I'll point that out. One of the probably most important things about using Burp is to understanding how important the context menu is, so that when you right-click on something, right-click in a request window or a response window or on any line item, you're going to see a fairly extensive menu of items. This is how you send stuff around inside of Burp. So you might send a request to one of the other tools from one tool. So that's kind of really important. And there's a submenu on there, these engagement tools, which are generally not available in the free version. But here we are. They are available in the commercial version, and a lot of the functionality that's in here is also really important. You have your search and also some, I guess, specialized searches. So looking specifically for comments, scripts, references. References is basically back references. So what things link to this page that you're currently looking at. Some analysis on there. The discover content is pretty useful if you're doing a pen test and you run across a server that doesn't have, or that you're not sure what it is. This will actually look for, using a word list of common folders and files. It'll try to determine which ones are there. If you're familiar with Dirbuster, it's the same type of functionality. Moving on, the proxy tab. This basically, by default, it's set up to intercept, which is an unfortunate default in my opinion. Normally, when we're opening Burp, we want to start capturing traffic, not intercepting it right away. We just want to start building out an idea of what the application looks like. So so make sure you turn that off. There is an option under the proxy options to basically permanently turn that off. So I highly recommend you seek that out when you first use Burp. Once you've captured a request, so this one here, this is a request that I captured that off of the Secure Ideas website that looks like it was going out to Twitter. Basically, what I can do from here is I can make modifications to this request, and then I can forward it on or perform other actions on it. Some of the other functionality inside of the proxy tab, the HTTP history. This is an alternative view and probably one that gets used a lot more once you get into a pen test. So the target, if you remember, it's got sort of a folder-like structure. The HTTP history keeps everything in order, so you know what happened first, what happened next, so on and so forth. And so it's a really great way to kind of keep track of where you are in the test and what you've done, and also find a specific request. You can just issue a request, and then you can just look at the bottom of your list, and it should be there. The spidering tool, normally you invoke the spider through that context menu, and then you can come over here to pause it, take a look at the progress on it, that sort of thing. It does have an automated spidering tool. I recommend manually spidering through your application first, though, rather than just relying on the automated scanner. As far as I know, the automated scanner does not do a great job with dynamically generated links, so that's something that's better done manually. The scanning tool, this is not available in the free version, but basically it gives you an idea of what sort of vulnerabilities the Burp has actually detected, and it does two types of scanning. So it does a passive scan, which this is already done. So the pages that I visited, it's pulled out not just vulnerabilities but also informational items. And then there is an active scanner as well that you can execute. And the active scanner, of course, that's going to look for much more detailed vulnerabilities. It's going to reissue requests. It's not something that you want to run against systems without permission. The passive scanner, of course, since it is just analyzing normal traffic, it's perfectly safe to have that running and take a look at that if you're just browsing a website, because you're not actually sending any attack traffic with passive scanning. Intruder. Okay, so Intruder is our fuzzing tool. This is probably one of the most important parts of Burp, I would say. And it has basically the way it works is you have a couple of different tabs here. On this Positions tab, you're going to select where you're going to put your payload. In this case here, I've selected 2. Most of the time, you're only going to have one payload position when you're doing fuzzing, because you kind of want to break it down. If you try to do too many at a time, you might be confusing as to exactly what it is you're looking at in the results. So you pick your payload positions and you mark them with those little symbols. It'll highlight them on there for you. And then you go over to the Payloads tab, and this is where you select your payload. So you can see there's a payload type, which is currently simple lists. That is by far the most common type of payload that we use. We like to put in simple lists. It's just very straightforward. There are a lot of other options on there, though. I'll show them when I get to the demo. You can kind of look down the list then. Okay. The Repeater tab. So this is what allows us to reissue a request. So we can send something to Repeater through the context menu. And then you can basically come to this screen here and press that Go button, and then it's going to show you the response for that request. And then you can make a change on the request side and hit Go again, and it'll show you the response to that request. And so on and so forth. Up at the top, there's these little arrow buttons that they actually allow you to navigate back and forth between the various different requests that you've submitted. Okay, the sequencer, I'll just touch on this very briefly. It's basically if you have some kind of a token that is supposed to be random, like a session token, this is a tool that allows you to capture those, and then it does some analysis to determine exactly how random that token is. This is probably not as useful as it used to be. A tool, simply because so many web applications now rely on a container-generated session ID, and those are, for the most part, those have been pretty secure and random for quite some time. So, but you never know if you're working with a development team and they've come up with their own secret sauce, then this is a way to test it out. Decoder, probably not my favorite decoding tool, but it's effective enough inside of, and it's inside of Burp, which is good. So you can send a request or any part of a request. You just select something and send it over to the decoder. This also does encoding as well and hashing. But basically, you can press the Smart Decode button, and that'll usually work. I've found that it doesn't work so well with base64 encoded strings, so those you might have to manually select from the little decode drop-down on the right-hand side here. And then you can kind of get yourself back and forth between different encodings. So that comes in handy. And probably the most important thing to look at, at least for this particular webcast, is the Extender tab. So this is where you're going to install extensions, or take a look at the extensions that you have installed, and enable and disable them. There are actually two different ways of installing an extension. One is coming straight to this tab here under Extensions, and you just press this Add button here, and you select you select your jar file that has the extension in it, and then you from there it'll just bring it in and start it up and go from there. Your other option is to go into the BAP store, which is just like any of the app stores out there, and then there's a list of available extensions on there that you can just automatically download and enable that way. So, going back, I see there's a question under chat. Which is my preferred decoding tool? It's not that I have a preference. It's that there are some issues with the one inside of Burp, especially with encoding. For example, if I want to do URL encoding, it'll actually URL encode the entire string I pass in, not just the special characters portions of it. So if I want to keep my alphanumerics, it won't let me do that. So, but yeah, if I can find something else that does that, that would be good. Maybe that's a good idea for another extension, or maybe I'll just talk to the Portswigger folks and see if they can fix that. So anyway, that pretty much covers the very basics of Burp. Hopefully you have a good understanding of what the tool is and what sort of features are available in there. So now I'm going to move on to CO2. So what is CO2? Where does it come from? Well, CO2 is carbon dioxide, and I told you this was going to be important to remember what my hobbies were. I'm a home brewer, so CO2 is actually a byproduct of fermentation process. You put in sugar, you get out carbon dioxide and ethanol. And here's the simplified version for those who hate chemistry. Basically, it's the thing inside of bubbly drinks that makes the bubbles. So. And what does it have to do with burp? Well, the bubbles kind of make you burp. So anyway, I was trying to come up with something clever to go with burp because I thought burp was kind of a funny name for a proxy, and so CO2 is what I came up with. So what is it really? So on the project page, I kind of list this description on here. I'll let you go ahead and read that. but really, it's an extension. It's actually an extension made up of multiple modules. And the way it came about is I just found I was for various different web pen tests. It would be something along the lines of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I had a tool that did X, or if I had a tool that did Y built into Burp? And it was usually something fairly simple, trying to make up a list or something like that for fuzzing. And after a while of having a couple of these one-off tools, I decided it would be easier just to make a sort of a framework to throw these things into. And that's what Burp CO2 is. It's actually a framework around these modules as well. It makes it pretty easy for me to add new ones without having to recode a bunch of stuff. So it's pretty good for that. My design objectives, though, I want to make sure that first of all it's free and open source. That was kind of important to me. I like contributing back to the community, and I wanted to make sure this was something that would work both in the free and pro versions of Burp Suite. I mean, it's some of it's really only going to be very useful in the pro version, because if we're making a list that we're going to run through Intruder, and Intruder is disabled in the free version. I mean, it works, but it just works really, really slow. But at least you can try it out and see how it works. I wanted to make something that was fairly easy on resources. Burp has enough to do already. The last thing I want to do is add a bunch of overhead. So I'm trying really hard to architect all of the CO2 modules so that they are as easy as possible on resources and releasing them as soon as they don't need them, and so on and so forth. I am avoiding third-party library dependencies. I don't want anybody who's using CO2 to have to go download something else in order to use it. That's just kind of unnecessary for for the most part. And probably the hardest one is to try to keep it easy to learn and to use. And part of that is I have some embedded help links inside of CO2. And I try to keep that content up to date. I'm not always successful at that, but at least it's the thought that counts, right? So hopefully I'll get some of that updated, because I've made a lot of changes to CO2 in recent months. So looking at Burp Extensions now. So I'll just talk briefly about it. So extensions come in you can make them in 3 different flavors. You can make them in Ruby, you can make them in Python, and you make them in Java. So if you're familiar with any of those 3 languages, you're probably at least 80% of the way there. And you'll be able to create your own extensions. There is a whole API for doing this, and that's available and extremely well documented. The Portswigger guys have done a really good job with that. I personally, I haven't seen very many Ruby-based. I've only seen a couple of them. I've seen quite a few Python and quite a few Java. There is a bit of a caveat, though, and this is directly off the Portswigger website. I just copied and pasted. So basically, because Jython and JRuby, because of the way they do their Java class generation, it looks like there may be some resource allocation issues where it doesn't necessarily deallocate properly. So if you're using those, you probably don't want to use a lot of them at the same time, and you don't want to be loading and unloading and loading and unloading within the same Burp session. You probably want to at some point exit out of Burp and come back in order to free up those resources. But I wouldn't have that scare you away from trying those out, because there's actually quite a few pretty decent extensions I've seen written, especially in Python, because there's quite a few of those. So. Okay, what can we do with the API? We can do a lot of things. We can process and modify the requests. We can kick off some of the actions inside of Burp. some of the other actions that are in there. Start scans or do spidering over just certain areas. We can actually add items to the basically that findings list under the scanner. We can actually come up with custom scanning tests so that when you run the scanner, you can test for additional things, not just the ones that are embedded inside of Burp. Let's see, you can also do payload generators for Intruder, and we actually have one of those inside of CO2, which is kind of cool. And you can also make changes to the user interface. There's quite a bit that you can do. It's a lot of it's really up to your imagination, but this is another place where Portswigger has done a really good job. They've exposed much of the application through this API, so there's a lot of customization options for you. How do you get to the API? It's actually pretty simple. You just, under Extender, go to the APIs tab, and down there at the very bottom, you can get to the interface files and the Java docs. It's all right there. You don't even have to go to a website for it. If you have Burp, you already have it. Okay, very quickly, how do you go through and write an extension? So first, you're going to need to get some kind of a Java IDE, or if you're writing in Python or Ruby, you want an appropriate IDE for those. I recommend, if you don't already have an IDE of choice and you're looking to try one out, I recommend trying IntelliJ Community Edition. It's free, which is always a good thing, and it's what Portswigger uses. Not that it matters; you'll still be able to write extensions with something else, but one of the really cool features that it does have that I found very useful for writing the CO2 is it has a drag and drop based user interface development tool in there that's pretty powerful and very easy to use. So you want to write some code, and I'm not going to go through the details of everything you need to write, but for those who are listening to the webcast who are familiar with Java, it's as simple as implementing an interface, the iBurp extender interface, which has one function call in there, register extender callbacks. And then from there, it just kind of cascades into your custom code to do what you need to do. The user interface itself, this is a screenshot from IntelliJ. It's actually an older version of my SQL mapper. And you can see that basically there's all the controls are on that right-hand side, and you drag and drop them into place onto the UI builder, and then you can very easily link those to the actual Java code file. It does a pretty good job of that. So then you jar it up and load it into Burp. And your IDE will help you with the jarring process as well. So, once you're really happy with it, you want to share it with everybody else. You can either publish it on your website or reach out to Portswigger and see if you can get it onto the BAP store. And this is a screenshot. I think this is a bit of an older one, though. I think there's more extensions on there now. Or actually, no, maybe not. This actually is a new one, because I just saw Heartbleeds on there. So, okay, so let's get back to CO2 and kind of get down to the meat of what I really wanted to talk about today. So we have a number of different modules on there. I have some other functionality that I've thrown in as well, but these are the main ones. So you'll notice that in the same fashion as the Portswigger's Burp tool itself, I've tried to end as many tools as possible in ER or OR, so it's a so I have SQL Mapper, User Generator, Name Mangler, Cooler, Basic Author, and so on and so forth. I'll go through each one of these in a little bit of detail, and then we'll jump over to the demo so you can see it. So SQL Mapper is meant to, this is probably the first one that became popular. It facilitates the use of SQL Map. So if you're not familiar with SQL Map, it is the tool you should be using to look for and exploit SQL injection flaws. It is probably the most comprehensive tool out there for that. So I didn't want to rewrite SQL map. That's not the intent. But if you have used it before, then you already know that using it, well, it just has lots and lots and lots of options. So what I wanted to do was come up with a way that would sort of reduce the human error of going back and forth between Burp and SQL map, doing copy and paste, copy the cookies over, copy the post data over, and then trying to remember what all the different options were for everything. And it just, I wanted to kind of speed that up and reduce basically make it more efficient and reduce the amount of human error in that process. And so that's where I came up with this one. Constructs a string for you. One thing that I have added more recently, though, by popular demand, there is a run button now. So it will actually open a terminal window for you and execute the command. The caveat is I currently only have it actually working on iOS and Windows. It seems to be not quite working right on Linux yet. That's one of the problems with going down that approach. I was afraid of was I'm going to run into operating system dependencies, but I'm trying to get that working too. So hopefully I'll have that soon on Linux. But if you're already on a Mac or on Windows, then that run button should work. If it doesn't, please let me know. Next, we have the user generator. So this is for generating usernames. And a place where you might look, this might be where maybe you're looking for username harvesting when you don't know what any of the users are. So you get to a system, you just have there's a login, and you're trying to figure out, well, can I harvest usernames off of this? And so basically, it uses statistical data from the Social Security website. Baby first names were conveniently listed there by decade. And then there's the census.gov site for last names. The reason why the baby names by decade is relevant is because what was popular 30 or 40 years ago might not be. It might be in a completely different order 10 or 20 years ago. And so depending on your target, depending on what your target is, you might have, like, let's say it's retirees. You may be using a different range of dates there to generate your data. So anyway, this allows you to generate some usernames that you can put in there. I'll show that afterwards. The name Mangler, a little bit different. This one here, you have a small list of names of people that are using the site. This will actually generate some different combinations. So me, Jason Gillam, there's a couple examples at the bottom of the types of things it might generate. Okay, Cooler. For those who are familiar with DigiNinja's Cool tool, this is in concept is the same idea. One of the key differences is Cool will spider over. So you point it at a URL, and it'll basically spider the site for you and collect the words on basically the content through that site and generate a word list from that. That's what it does. What the CO2 version does, you take your responses from content that you've already looked at while doing your web pen test, and you just send them straight over to Cooler. So you don't have to re-spider anything. And then it'll generate it directly there within Burp, and then you can send it over to Intruder. Okay. Next, and I kind of hesitate a little bit on this one as to whether or not this was necessary, but I've run into enough cases where this just seems to make things easier. So how many times are you doing a web pen test and you run across some website that has basic auth on it? Happens all the time, right? So you can basically submit your own request to that site. type in some username or password, and then you can send that request over to Intruder and put your payload position around the basic auth string, and then use basic author to generate a list of username password combinations that are base64 encoded, so they work inside of that that basic auth field. So that's basically what the purpose of that is. So it just generates a list of base64 encoded username password combinations. Masher. Okay, this is actually technically a password cracker, maybe. What it does is it takes a list of words. So you can take your dictionary of words, and it will also take a password specification. So let's say you figured out that, and this is when you go to a registration screen, you can usually figure this out. That passwords have to be a certain length, or between a certain minimum and maximum length. Maybe they have to be have to include one alphabet, one alpha, one numeric, uppercase, lowercase, number, certain symbols. So you give it that password specification, and it will combine and morph those dictionary words in various different ways to come up with words that actually fit that specification. And that's really what it does. So it's a sort of a customized list generator. Where I found this to be particularly useful is where you have some information about a very specific target. So maybe you've gone over Facebook and you found the name of their dog. You have their kids' names, birthdays, where they work. You have some information that's very specific to that person that they may use in combination with other pieces of information inside of a password. So, question: how to create user generator using numbers? Okay, I'll circle back on that one after. Okay, CO2 Laudanum. Okay, Laudanum is a project that's been around for a while. It's another one that's that Secure Ideas is behind, and it basically what it is it's a list of exploit payloads. So Laudanum by itself, if you go to the Laudanum project, you'll find PHP, ASP, ASPX, JSP. War files, and then there's a number of other ones too. I think there's even Cold Fusion out there. What we've done here with CO2 Laudanum is we've taken the same concept, but what we're trying to do is make it embedded inside of Burp, for one. But also setting up the Laudanum payloads themselves takes a little bit. There's a little bit of work involved, and we just really wanted to simplify it as much as possible. So and where that work is, that's around the protections. So you're going to find there's a lot of exploits out there. There's a lot of like PHP files that are backdoors that you can deploy into systems. The problem is you don't want to deploy something during a pen test that could be used by an actual attacker. And they're going to look for those things. So what we do is we actually include an IP filter, and in the original Laudanum, there's a username password for any of the shell scripts that or shell exploits that you put out there, but I've switched that out inside of Laudanum for CO2 version of Laudanum for just a random token. So it's just a really long random token. So okay, so it functions as a web service. So you're not gonna, once you deploy it, you won't actually see a web page out there. You have to interact with it through Burp. At least for now, that's the case. I may actually develop a web-based front end for interacting with it as well, maybe through Ajax. Okay. And then, yeah, so where's this useful? It's useful in any case where you can find somewhere to upload a file. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. There's some chatter going on in the chat here, and I'm going to address that right now. So if you go to the BAP store and you download the version of CO2 that's on the BAP store, that is an older version. It is not the latest, and so it's actually missing several of the tools, especially these last couple that I've mentioned. So if you want to get the latest, uninstall the one from the BAP store. I'm going to get back to Portswigger on that and get the latest out there, but it's just not there yet. And then go to www.burpco2.com and follow the download link there, and that will actually get you a jar file that you can put in that does have all of these features on here. So, from the project page, yeah, I think that link might need to be updated. The one on the Secure Ideas project page might be outdated. So just best thing to do is just go to burpco2.com and pull it from there. That one I've been keeping up to date, and I'll circle back and make sure we get the Secure Ideas one updated as well. So, all right, time for a little demo. I will jump into the tools now. We'll check them out so everyone can see them and decide if there's something you want to use. And then afterwards, I will keep the chat window open for a while and take any questions you have. Okay, so for this demo, what I've done is we're looking at the Samurai Web Testing Framework virtual machine. This is version 3.0. I've gone ahead and installed the pro version of Burp because we don't actually have that inside of it. But other than that, it's basically the vanilla one. And one of the reasons why I'm using this is because it has a number of targets already installed in there. So it has vulnerable targets that we can play around with the tools with in there. So it just makes it a little bit easier. So there's the Samurai Web Testing Framework page if you're looking for that. It's a Ubuntu-based distro. Here's the Burp CO2. If you go to www.burpco2.com, it'll forward you over to the where the download is for the CO2 suite. I'll also mention that there are some standalone jars. So if you don't want all of Burp CO2, but you want either a SQL Mapper or a Laudanum, those are actually also built as standalone tools. They're a fair bit smaller. I don't really think it's a major deal, but I've had enough requests to have those separated that that they're available that way. So, all right, and this is one of the targets inside of Samurai that we'll go ahead and use for the purpose of demonstration here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the login screen on here. Actually, I'll just click on a couple of different things so we have some requests inside of Burp. Just want to make sure we have that. Okay. So here we are. We're looking at Burp. If we go over to the extender, I've already loaded CO2 on here, but I currently don't have it enabled, so I'll want to enable that. Okay. And then once I've done that, a couple of things have happened. So first of all, I have this CO2 tab has shown up, and that's how I get into the CO2 modules. And then the other thing that's happened is on the context menu, I now have some additional options that have shown up. So these are things that I've added through the API, both the tab and and these options here, and then all the code behind them, of course. All right, so first thing we'll look at is the SQL Mapper tool. So we need a request that actually includes something, some kind of data on it, something that we'd want to attack. Happen to know that this particular target does have a SQL injection flaw on the login page, so it makes it a little easier. So what you'll do is you'll find that request. Now you can either find it here inside of your target sitemap, or you can find it under your proxy history, which is what I usually do. It'll be the post request here. Okay, and you can click on either the request or on the request on the list here, and you'll want to send to SQL Mapper. Okay. Once you've done that, you'll see a couple of things have happened. First, you get moved over to the SQL Mapper tab automatically, and it started to actually populate the command for you. So it's going to, if there is post data, it'll automatically put that in there for you. If it's just a get, it won't. If there are any cookies, then it will automatically add those as well, or you can just add those separately afterwards. As soon as you start typing anything, well, in this case here, we actually have to tell it to include it. So if we have, cookies we want to include, if we want to make any changes to the detection, let's say we want to do a different level, just select it on there, and it'll populate the options for you. One of the biggest differences I've made recently is I've broken down the information that was below into, right now I have 5 different tabs, these 5 different sub-tabs, and there are a lot more options available than I previously had on the SQL Mapper tool. One area that's I've added in is this whole techniques thing, and basically if you want to limit or control some of the alternative techniques for doing your SQL injection, then this is where you would do that. So you have your parameters for your union-based queries are there, your time-based. You can set. I do have. Trying to get it. There we go. Tool tips over many things to kind of help you out a little bit. So. The delay, for example, it's by default it's 5 seconds, so you don't have to change that. But let's say you want to work with 3 seconds, you put a 3 in there, and it's automatically put the right option on there on your SQL map command for you. Also of use, of course, is the enumeration tab. This is similar to what was there before. There's I think a couple of new options on there. And then I've added, because this has also come in handy, the ability to actually send your SQL map traffic through a proxy. So all of the proxy options are now here, as well as authentication options. So if you have basic auth, for example, you can add that in there. So what do you do with this? Well, you can right-click and hit Copy All. That's the easiest thing to do, or that's what, actually the easiest thing is probably to run the Run button, but that doesn't work in Linux. So and what you'll do is you still have to start your command, because it's depending on how your system's set up. It could be different. Sometimes you might have to type Python and SQLmap.py. Depends on how you run SQL Map. In this case here, we actually have a script in the path inside of Samurai. So SQL map space, and then we just paste that in there and hit enter, and it's going to go ahead and do its usual thing. I'm just going to go ahead and select all the defaults, and there we go. So in this case here, SQL map, SQL map has found that the username parameter is vulnerable. So at this point, it hasn't actually exploited the vulnerability. It's gone through a bunch of detection. So it's detected it. It's detected that it's both vulnerable to Boolean-based blind type as well as error-based, and or type blind as well. So there's different types of SQL injection, different techniques that it's vulnerable to. So given that much information, let's say we wanted to then enumerate the databases. You would just click on that button there. All it does is adds --DBS, but I can't remember all of the different flags for everything, so it's easier to just have a checkbox. And then you're going to copy this and paste that over to the same area. So again, SQL map space, and then run that command. And you'll see here now available databases, it's actually gone ahead and enumerated the databases. So now it's actually exploiting the SQL injection flaw, listing the databases that are there. Okay. Make sure that if you're using SQL map, it's just probably worth noting that you're actually doing it against a system that you have permission to test, because it can get you in a lot of trouble if you don't. That's why I use the targets that are built inside of Samurai. It's a safe environment. Okay, and then let's say we've enumerated a database. We want to maybe pin to one of those. So what were the databases that were there? Like OWASP 10. I'll just pick one. OWASP 10. Okay, and then maybe I want to enumerate the tables that are on there. And it continues to just add options up here. So then you just copy all of that. SQL map again. Paste that in. Everything's good to go. And then it has listed off the tables for me. Okay. So all of that, it's actually, again, for those who are not familiar with SQL map itself has determined exactly which HTTP requests need to be submitted and how to format them in order to extract information from the database. And so that's how it's, and all we're doing with SQL mappers is coming up with the right command to do that. So let me skip over laudanum for now. I'll come back to that one. We'll look at the user generator tool. So like I said, in this one here, you can kind of pick which decade you want your names to come from. Some options around how you want it formatted, uppercase, lowercase. Do you just want the initial or do you want the full first name? And then surnames, how many do you want to include? It does cut off the list at 200,000 because this could go on for quite a long time. So I haven't changed that yet. You can also put a delimiter between names if you want both. So I can say, do I just want first names or just last names, or do I want to do combinations? So if I click the combos button, we can see that here's the list of usernames that gets generated. And for those who are interested in knowing, the top, if you're just looking at just initials and last names, the top most common combination is going to be J. Smith. So. All right. Next, I'll look at the name mangler. So there's a few different options here. Maybe I have a domain as well. SecureIdeas.com, and this will just come up with some different possible usernames. So if you have a person you know uses the system, this is a way to kind of guess at maybe what their login could be. And it goes pretty fast. And there's some additional options here. These will make the list longer. One will add numerical suffixes or years, because sometimes those are used. Then we have cooler. So for cooler, we need to actually give it something to use to pull the words out of. So what you'll do is go to either your target sitemap tab or your proxy HTTP history. I'm going to use the target one, so it's a little bit easier for me to find. And I'm just going to select everything. that's on there, and I'll right click, and now there's this send to cooler. The send to cooler is only available on for URLs that you've actually fetched. So it needs, because it needs the responses. So if you're just looking at a link or a request, it's not going to have that option. So I send that over to Cooler. It doesn't bring you there right away because the idea is you might be navigating around and picking various different pages in different applications or parts of your test. So once you find them, you go over to the Cooler tab under CO2, and you'll see all of the requests are listed here, and then you just hit the extract words, and it will start pulling the words out. Now you can save this to a list, or you can just right click and copy all, or select all and copy it, and then paste that into Intruder. So where we might use this, this is actually a good chance to take a look at Intruder. So let's say we know that we have a username admin that uses this. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll go over to this word list, and I'll just copy all of that. From our HTTP history, we look for the post that actually has that that I just submitted. So it's admin and username admin, password. And I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to send that to Intruder. Now the Intruder tab inside of Burp is highlighted. Okay. And if I go to the Positions sub-tab, I can see it's gone ahead and highlighted various things for me, and I actually don't want those. There's only one that I want, which is the password itself. Okay, so we're going to highlight that. Next, I'm going to go to the Payloads tab, and it's already set up for me here. All you need to do is press the Paste button, and that'll put our list in there. And then there are you can go through and set the other options. There's a bunch of different options on here. There's some payload processing. You can do things like apply encodings to your payload before it gets sent. Under options, there's a lot of options here for throttling. These won't be enabled in the free version, I don't think. And then there's also a number of options here for filtering out your responses, so you can narrow down, maybe look for certain error codes, or extract certain types of information. So once you're happy with the way it's set up, hit the Start Attack button, and that will actually start running the attack. And so here we've done some fuzzing, and what we're looking for is anything that's different. So we might look for maybe a different status code, and you can just use the search feature to kind of make differences bubble up. We did find, in this case, the length of one of them is different, which that would be something that we would then want to look into. So, okay. Next on the list is Masher. Okay, I personally think this is kind of a cool module. You can give it a list. I'm just going to take the list I just generated from Cool, but I'm going to actually take out the dates from it because they will make the output kind of muddies up the demonstration. And then we have a password specification. So a minimum number of characters, maximum number. I'll just leave the defaults there. So the minimum is 6. So it's not going to give me any passwords that are less than 6 characters. You'll notice we have a lot of words that are less than 6 characters, so it's going to have to combine those with other words. We can also say that we want at least one alpha, uppercase, one lowercase, one numeric, one special, and we'll just leave the default special characters as they are. And then what we do is we hit. We have two options here. One is we can just create the payload generator, and I'll show that one in a moment. But we can also get some sample output. So I'll just go ahead and press the sample output button. Depending on your selections, sometimes that sample output might take a few seconds to generate. So if it does, just be patient. And we'll see here, I guess the word base 64 was in there, which has a numeric already. But you'll see what it does is it goes after the most commonly used patterns first. So let me just see here. I'm trying to get past the base 64 ones. There we go. So it's done things like added an exclamation point at the end. It will add the number 1 or 1, 2, 3 at the end of things. It will do common leet speaks substitutions, so using the @ sign instead of an A, or the $ instead of an S. And it will combine all of these in these different ways. It will also make sure that we have, again, a minimum of 6 characters. So if the word's not long enough, it'll tack on more things or put 2 words together. So it's not going to do every single possible combination, but I think it does a pretty good job of coming up with some that are likely candidates for a password. Okay, next we have the basic author, which I put in some reasonable defaults. If you're just looking to see if someone's using a weak password for something that's administrative, then this would probably do. You might want to have you can add your own lists in there for usernames and passwords. Simply, you just hit the generate button and it just generates them for you, and then you can just put them into your payload position and run that through. And it does all combinations, so every username with every password that's on there. So that one's really straightforward. Now, laudanum. Okay, so for laudanum, there's 2 parts to this. First, you need to generate your payload, and then you need to deploy it, which you'll have to do outside of this. So you'll deploy that onto your target server through whatever means you have available to you. And then you'll want to connect to it, and then you can interact with it. So generating it's really straightforward. You pick the type, you set your IP, and this needs to be, in this case it's just the local loopback because I'm running with my targets actually on the same machine. But normally you would put your externally facing IP address. So this is the IP that the server that you're attacking is going to see coming from you, or you coming from rather. And then you'll want to use a token. You can reuse your same token, or you can generate a new one each time you generate a file. The gen new token, you can actually type in whatever you want in there. Really, it'll let you use anything you want. But generating the token on there, it'll actually spit something out that's reasonably random and secure. So. And then you'll need to connect to it. So you have 2 options. One is to just type in the host. The resource is the name of the file that you've deployed. You can call it anything you want as long as you can find it again. And then you have your port. The prepend is used for, I haven't come up with a more elegant way to do this, but this is specifically for Windows-based. I think it's just ASP. And then whether or not it's a get or a post. The only problem with doing it this way is it may not always work. So if the server requires certain headers, for example, we haven't specified those here, so this is going to generate a pretty vanilla request. If we want all that other information as well, what we need to do is tell laudanum what the base request looks like, and it will use that. So I've gone ahead and deployed this file already ahead of time, just to save some time. And I've just gone ahead and visited it. Nothing's on the screen. That's okay. The reason why there's nothing on the screen is because it's waiting to interact as a web service. So I'm going to go over to my proxy history, and it should be there, this last thing that I went to. So that's what's invoking that shell. Right click, I send that to laudanum. And it will bring me over there automatically. This time it has the checkbox here, use request template. So it's automatically populated everything for me. And it's actually held on to a copy of that request, and it's going to use that to communicate with the shell. Then I select this connect button, and there we go. We have basically a shell type of access onto the server, and it's sitting inside of Burp. And I can interact with this. I can take a look at the process list. Cat Etsy password. Can do a lot of interactions. You do have to keep in mind that this isn't a true shell in the sense that you can't invoke an interactive program. If I tried to go in VI, for example, I would probably run into a lot of trouble. What's really happening is this is bundling up my command, and it's sending it over HTTP or HTTPS to the server, where my shell is taking that command, executing it, taking the standard output from there and the standard error, and sending that back. So you don't want to invoke something that requires like a user interactive screen. It's going to be you're going to run into issues if you do that. But you can still accomplish everything. It's just you have to, in some cases, do it the long way. So I think that's it. So let me go back to our presentation. And yeah, so that's all I have. I will hang around for a little bit for questions. Before I do, though, please, if you found this useful at all, we have a couple of other upcoming events. We have 2 webcasts coming up in February. One is I'm doing one on web services, and Kevin Johnson and James Jardine are going to do one on Burp Suite. It's more of a deeper dive. And both of those are $25. We do have to make a living, so it's probably worth it. The web services one should run about 2 hours. And then the other thing, also the webcast catalog is there. And when I post this out on YouTube, I'll make sure we put that link in there too, so you can get to our other webcasts as they come up. And upcoming conferences, we have lots of conferences that we'll be visiting this year, but stuff that's coming up just this month. Kevin Johnson and Jason Wood from Secure Ideas will be at ShmooCon in January, so if anyone's going, touch base with them. They'd love to talk to you. We're all geeks. We really love what we do. So if you have any questions or anything, you want to talk to somebody, go ahead. And there's my thank you slide. So now I'll jump into questions. I have a mandatory plug here. If you're looking at, if you need any sort of pen testing services, or if you're looking for tools to do like high volume scanning, you want to check out our Scout solution. It's actually pretty good and very reasonably priced, so yeah, it's worth looking at. So questions.